everyone, we are back today to finish the Yellow Yacht. So, last time we learned that the kids are visiting Sammy and Kostra and they're building a new aquarium. However, the gold that was being used to build the aquarium has been stolen. And it's Sammy's birthday. Tonight is Sammy's birthday party. And Yonder, a magician, just did a really cool trick and made a coin disappear. Chapter 6. The four kids entered the royal dining room at 7 o'clock. The table was set with a white tablecloth that reached the floor. The queen's best dishes sparkled under the candlelight. The king and queen smiled at the kids. "This is your night, Sammy. There will be no discussion of the missing gold," the king stated. In the middle of the table sat 3 large pizzas. "How do you know pizza's my favorite meal?" Josh asked, rubbing his stomach. Sammy grinned. "It's my favorite too," he said. A half hour later, only pizza crusts were left. A servant cleared the table. "Time to open your presents," Sammy's mother said. Stacked on a nearby table were the gifts Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose had brought in their luggage. Dink's present was a book about Connecticut. He showed Sammy a map inside and pointed out Greenlawn. Josh gave Sammy a small wooden eagle. "I carved it myself," Josh said, blushing. "It's awesome," Sammy said. "Thanks, Josh." Ruth Rose brought a travel-sized Monopoly game. "I thought we could play after dinner," she said, "but watch out for Josh. He cheats." The king set a large gold-foiled box in front of Sammy. "This is from your mother and me," he said. "Happy birthday, son." Sammy tore off the paper to find a new computer. He gave his mother and father hugs. "Thank you, it's just what I wanted. Now we can email each other," Ruth Rose said. I would not know what to get a prince for his birthday. I think I'd be stumped about that one. Excellent, said the king. "And now Yonder is going to entertain us." The king clapped his hands and the room lights dimmed. A door opened and everyone watched for the magician to enter. But there was no one there. "Yonder at your service," came a voice from the opposite side of the room. When they turned, Yonder stood at the end of the table next to the queen. He was dressed entirely in white. "How did you get in here?" Sammy said. "There's only one door." Instead of answering, Yonder pulled a green bandana out of Sammy's ear. For the next 20 minutes, Yonder amazed them with magic tricks, doing one right after the other. He tied knots and colored hankies and let the kids check that the knots were tight. Then he ran his hand over the knots and the hankies separated. He turned normal eggs into rabbits and rabbits into beautiful doves. He wet 2 fingers and snuffed out a candle. Then he opened his mouth and breathed fire like a dragon. "For my final illusion, I will make one of you disappear," Yonder said to the small group. Then he pulled a large black cloth from a sleeve and shook it out, covering himself. When the cloth dropped, Yonder was gone. In his place stood a tall silver box about the size of an old-fashioned phone booth. The door of the box opened, and Yonder stepped out. But now he was dressed from head to toe in red. Yonder smiled at Ruth Rose. "Will you be my assistant?" he asked. "Okay, but be sure to bring me back again," Ruth Rose said. Yonder let Ruth Rose into the box. He closed the door and draped the black cloth over it. Then he knocked on the cloth with his knuckle. "You still in there, Ruth Rose?" he asked. "No, I'm up here," came Ruth Rose's voice from above their heads. Everyone looked up toward the ceiling. It was dark, so the king turned up the lights. Ruth Rose was nowhere in sight. Yonder knocked on the box again. "Ruth Rose, are you in there?" This time there was no answer. Josh let out a giggle. "She really did disappear," he whispered. Yonder whisked the cloth away from the box and opened the door. It was empty. The 3 boys leapt up and examined the box. "What are you looking at?" Ruth Rose asked from behind them. The boys whipped around. Ruth Rose was back in her seat at the table. "How did you do that?" Josh asked Ruth Rose. She looks so cool. That's a pretty neat trick. "I'll never tell," she said. Just then a servant carried a cake with 10 lit candles in it. Yonder started to leave. "Please, stay for some cake," the king said with a smile, "as long as you don't make it disappear." Yonder smiled. "Only my piece will disappear," he said. Sammy made a wish and blew out the candles, and they ate. That looks like such a good cake. Maybe I'm just getting hungry. "I'm going to bust open," Josh said later as the servant cleared the table. King Farhad and Queen Grace excused themselves. "You kids can sit up and play Monopoly if you wish," the queen said, "but not too late, Sammy." The kids decided to play in Sammy's room. As they climbed the stairs toward the bedroom wing, Dink was thinking about the missing gold. "Sammy, where did your father find Yonder?" he asked. "I don't know," Sammy said. "I was just as surprised as you guys to see him." "Does he live in Kostra or did he fly here like we did?" Dink asked. "Why, does it matter?" Sammy asked. "I'm not sure," Dink said, "but don't you think it's strange that your father's gold disappeared right after Yonder got here?" That's the end of the chapter. So if Yonder can make people disappear, maybe he can make gold disappear too. Chapter 7. "What, you think Yonder stole the gold?" Sammy asked. "Well, he made a lot of other stuff disappear," Dink said. "Like you, Ruth Rose." "He didn't make me disappear," Ruth Rose said. "It was a trick. While you guys were changing for the party, Yonder asked me to help him. See, he's a ventriloquist too. He threw my voice up to the ceiling. When you guys all looked up there, I scooted out of the box and crawled under the table. Then I just got up and sat in the chair again." If Yonder was the thief, where did he hide the gold? Sammy asked Dink. And how would he get it away from near? The guards check every car going through the gate. No one could get past them. Except maybe a magician, Dink mumbled. I think Rico and Mr. Baz are the crooks, Ruth Rose said. I hate to admit it, but I agree with Ruth Rose, Josh said. I think Mr. Baz was on the other side of the wall with the getaway car waiting for Rico to drop the gold over. They both told the cops they had never seen that note, Sammy said. Mr. Baz said someone must have stolen that writing paper from his office. Just then a shadow fell over the kids. Yonder had appeared at the top of the stairs. We meet again, the magician said. What are you whispering about? We're just talking about the gold robbery, Sammy said. Ah, yes, your parents told me about the bank manager and the job foreman, Yonder said. What a shame. Well, I leave early tomorrow morning, and I will say good night. And happy birthday, Sammy. Yonder walked past the kid and disappeared into his room. They all heard the door lock. The next morning, the kids walked down to the aquarium pit. No one was working on it. Yellow crime scene tape had been strung around the whole place. The backhoe stood right where it had been. The bank was locked up with a big close sign on the door. Wonder if my father will ever get the gold back, Sammy said. Did Yonder leave yet? Dink asked. Sammy nodded. I saw him drive away this morning, he said. Hello, the kids heard someone yell from below them. Dr. Skouras had tied a yellow inflatable dinghy to the dock and was walking toward them. Any news of the robbery? He asked when he reached the 4 kids. Sammy brought him up to date on Rico and Mr. Baz. Dr. Skouras nodded. Yes, I assumed it was an inside job, he said. At least the culprits are behind bars where they belong. And how was your party, Sammy? Cool, my dad hired a magician and he was awesome, Sammy said. A magician, how wonderful. Dr. Skouras showed the kids a grocery list. I must get to the store. Your parents are joining me for lunch on my boat, he said. You kids are invited too, of course. He hurried off toward the shops. I hope Dr. Skouras is a good cook, Josh said. He always wants to eat. At noon, a sturdy-looking fiberglass boat pulled up to the dock. A boy who looked about 16 years old was at the motor. He wore a bathing suit and a tank top. Hi, Hugo, Sammy cried. These are my friends, Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. They're from Connecticut in America. I want to visit your country someday, Hugo said. Do you live near New York City? Yes, Dink said. My Uncle Warren lives there. If you come to visit, you can stay with us. Hugo beamed. Thank you. Hugo is going to study at the new school, the king told the kids, and one day he'll work at the aquarium. Hugo helped everyone aboard and motored toward the Yellow Yacht. How are you spending your summer vacation? The queen asked Hugo. The boy grinned. I'm doing a lot of diving and snorkeling, he said. Do you see a lot of fish around here? Asked Josh. Hugo nodded. Every size and color you can imagine, he said. I'll take you guys snorkeling later if you want. Sammy looked at his parents. Can we? He asked. His father said, Of course, Hugo. Do you have 4 life vests? Yes, sir, Hugo said. He looked at his diver's watch. How about 3 o'clock? Excellent, Sammy said. I've got snorkel gear you guys can borrow. A few minutes later, Hugo dropped them off and they climbed aboard Sundown. Please come back to us at 2 o'clock, the king called back at Hugo. Hugo saluted. I'll be there, he said. Soon the lunch guests were seated on comfortable benches around the table on Sundown's foredeck. A canvas canopy kept the sun off. Your boat is beautiful, Ruth Rose told Dr. Skouras. Thank you, my dear, Dr. Skouras said. Would you like to explore her before we eat? Sure, she said. The kids scampered away. They examined every part of the yacht, fore and aft. In the galley, they found a stove, sink, and refrigerator. A man was preparing their lunches. There were 3 bright bedrooms. The kids stepped inside the largest one on a bright blue carpet. The room had a king-size bed and a chair near the opposite of the porthole. Next to the door was an antique desk. Dink saw papers and letters with Dr. Skouras' name on them. Holding down a few letters was a paperweight in the shape of a small boat. Dink saw a green stripe on the boat and realized it was a miniature replica of the Sundown. Just then they heard the bell ring above them. Lunch, Josh said, and the kids headed for the stairs. He loves to eat. Chapter 8. Dr. Skouras, my husband told me you're studying coral, is that right? The queen asked as the lunch dishes were being cleared. Yes, Dr. Skouras said. Coral is dying and... Wait, I have some photographs. Dr. Skouras left the table and returned with a photo album. They flipped through the pages as Dr. Skouras showed them pictures of healthy coral and sick or dead coral. When coral dies, other sea life dies, the scientist said. Is this a picture of Sundown? Ruth Rose asked him, pointing to another photograph. Yes, I took this with my Polaroid camera when we arrived here a few days ago, Dr. Skouras said. Isn't she beautiful? The snapshot showed Sundown with her sails up, puffed up from a breeze. The yellow paint gleamed above the green stripe. In the background, Dink could see the stone pier and the castle. Do you fish off the boat? Josh asked. I don't, but my men do, Dr. Skouras said. Do you like to fish, Josh? The king asked. Sure, I love it, sir, Josh answered. Then maybe we can do some fishing before you leave, the king said. This has been lovely, the queen told Dr. Skouras. Please, come have dinner with us soon. Your food was delicious, but now I need a nap. Dr. Skouras smiled. This is my nap time too, he said, and I'm afraid I can't accept your kind invitation. We'll sail this afternoon as soon as the breeze picks up. I'm sorry you're leaving, the king said, but thank you for your suggestions on my project. Do come back and see us when the aquarium is up and running. There was a pause as if everyone was wondering if the aquarium would ever get finished. They said goodbye, and minutes later, Hugo's flat-bottomed boat pulled up. They all climbed aboard and headed back to the dock. Dink turned around and looked over Hugo's shoulder at sundown. He could see Dr. Skouras staring on the foredeck, watching them through binoculars. Watching the yacht get farther away, Dink didn't see the green stripe. He rubbed his eyes. How could the stripe just disappear, he wondered. What a good question. How would a stripe just disappear from the boat? That's weird. While the Queen napped and the King talked with the police, Sammy outfitted the kids with snorkel equipment. At 3 o'clock, they were waiting on the deck for Hugo. Hugo stopped a few minutes later. His boat left a small wake as it bumped gently against the dock. Climb in, he said. Will we see any sharks? Josh asked as the kids clambered down into the boat. Not where we're going, Hugo pointed to the right, just outside the harbor entrance. See that red buoy sticking up? It's marked the place where a boat sank a long time ago, he said. The water is shallow and lots of fish hang out there. Perfect for snorkeling. Hugo handed the 4 kids orange life vests and made sure they were fitted properly. He aimed the boat onto the harbor, and a few minutes later he reached the buoy. He stopped the engine and dropped the anchor. Then he tossed a float with a small flag attached to it into the water. This flag lets other boaters know that there are people in the water here, Hugo explained. When they see the flag, they stay away. Hugo helped the kids with their snorkels, masks, and flippers. He jumped into the water and showed them how to clamp the snorkel's mouthpiece in their teeth and breathe. When the kids were floating in the water, Hugo and Sammy showed them how to swim face down using their flippers and no arms. If you need me, just tap the top of your head with your hand like this, Hugo said, demonstrating. If I see that signal, I'll swim right over. With Hugo leading, the 4 kids flippered a few yards away from the flag. When Dink put his face underwater, he was amazed. The water was as clear as glass. Hundreds of fish darted every which way. He saw purple, blue, yellow, and red fish. 10 feet below the surface lay the sunken boat. It was partly rotted away. Seaweed and barnacles clung to the boat's broken hull. Several large rocks sat on the boat's bottom. The kids stayed near each other. Hugo pointed to a creature that looked like a lobster, but it didn't have big claws. When the creature saw the humans, it darted under the boat. After about 10 minutes of exploring, Hugo signaled that they should meet him at the boat. The kids paddled over and held on to the side. They removed their masks and mouthpieces so they could talk. This is so amazing, Josh said. A purple fish came right up to my mask and looked at me. Hugo, why are there rocks in the sunken boat? Dink asked. The rocks are to weigh it down so it won't drift away, Hugo said. The boat attracts fish. That looks like a blast and a half. Suddenly, Dink knew why Sundown's green stripe was missing. He felt his heart start to race. Goosebumps marched up his arms. Guys, I think I know where the gold is, Dink said. How did he just figure out where the gold is? The guy just said that he used rocks are used to weight down the sunken boat. What does that have to do with the gold? Chapter 9. Hugo helped the kids climb back aboard his boat. They sat drying in the sun while Dink explained to them what he suspected. I think Dr. Skouras stole the boat, he said, and I think it's on the boat. But where? Asked Ruth Rose. Remember, he let us look around. Wouldn't he be afraid we'd find the gold by accident? And what about Yonder and Rico and Mr. Baz? Sammy asked. Yeah, and the note we found about dropping the gold over the wall, Josh added. Dink shook his head, and water drops flew from his hair. I think Dr. Skouras put that note in the tunnel where the cops would find it, he said. I bet he had his crew dig the tunnel. He wanted the cops to think Rico and Mr. Baz pulled off the robbery. But what about the gold scrapings we saw in the backhoe shovel? Sammy asked. That was another of Dr. Skouras' fake clues, Dink said. The cops would search for the gold on land, but the gold is really on his boat. Hugo gazed across the water at Sundown. Why do you think it's on the boat, Dink? The first time we saw Sundown, there was a green stripe above the waterline, Dink said. He pointed across the harbor at Sundown. But look, there's no green stripe now. It came to me when I saw the rocks weighing down the sunken boat. The gold is making the Sundown heavier. The green stripe is still there, only we can't see it now because it's underwater. 5 pairs of eyes stared across the harbor at Sundown. So the gold, or the green stripe didn't just disappear. Maybe it is just now underwater because the boat's heavier. Where could it be hidden? Ruth Rose asked. If I stole that gold, I'd stash it under the boat, Hugo said. If the cops searched Sundown, they'd never think of looking on the bottom of the boat. Hugo switched on the boat's engine. Haul up the anchor, Sammy, he said. Let's check out the Sundown. Hugo motored slowly toward the yellow yacht. Try not to look suspicious, he said quietly. Pretend we're just cruising around the harbor. Hugo pulled around Sundown's anchor chain and tied it up next to Dr. Skouras' small dinghy. He slowed the engine so the motor was barely making a sound. We're behind the boat, so unless someone's on the rear deck, they can't see us, Hugo whispered. Dink squinted up at the deck. I don't see anyone, he said. Dr. Skouras told us he takes naps in the afternoon. Okay, Hugo said, reaching for his mask. I'm going in. If anyone says anything, just tell them I'm checking something on my motor. Hugo donned his masks and flippers and slipped over the side. He took a deep breath and disappeared beneath the water. The 4 kids stared at the spot where Hugo went under. They saw him disappear in the shadowy water under Sundown. They counted the seconds, holding their breath for Hugo. Suddenly a voice came from the rear of the deck of Sundown. What are you doing down there? You can't tie up on our anchor line. The kids looked up. They saw the man who had been making their lunches in Sundown's galley. Dink gulped. Before he could form an answer, Hugo's face broke the surface. He blew out the breath he'd been holding, then hoisted himself onto the boat. "Is that your boat?" the man on the deck shouted down. "Yes, sir," Hugo shouted back. "Had a little trouble with my propeller, but it's okay now." Hugo untied his line and pulled away. He turned forward toward the dock and revved up. "Did you see anything?" Dink asked. He was trembling all over, and it wasn't from the boat's vibrations. "Oh, yeah," Hugo said with a big grin on his face. "I saw plenty." "Did you see my father's gold?" Sammy asked. "Yep, it's there," he said. "Skor built a steel cage on the keel behind the propeller. The gold is stacked in the cage." The kids all looked back at Sundown. "He told us he's leaving port today," Ruth Rose said. "He can't sail because there's no wind," Hugo said, "which means he has to use his motor. The good news is his motor is small. He can't go very fast." Chapter 10. So they found the gold and the criminal. Now they just need to catch him. Chapter 10. Hugo dropped the kids off the dock. "Run and get your father," he said. "I'm going back out there to keep an eye on Sundown." With Sammy in the lead, the kids raced for the castle. The king was on the telephone in his office when they burst in. The king looked up. "Sammy, I'm talking to the police. Can you put..." "We found the gold," Sammy blurted out. The king's mouth dropped open. "Where?" he asked, ignoring the telephone. "Dink figured it out," Sammy told his father. "Dr. Skor hid the gold underneath his boat." Interrupting each other, the kids quickly explained how Hugo had swum beneath the yacht and spotted the gold. "But you have to hurry, Pop," Sammy said. "A guy on Sundown saw us. He'll tell Dr. Skor and they'll take off." The king spoke into the telephone. "Surround that yellow yacht in the harbor," he ordered, "and have your fastest boat pick me up at the dock in 3 minutes." The kids were surprised at how fast the king could run. He made it to the dock before they did and leaped into the sleek police boat. The boat practically flew out of the water as it sped towards Sundown. Hugo zoomed back toward the dock and whistled. The kids climbed in his boat, and he raced after the police. By now, 3 police boats had tied up to Sundown. As Hugo and the kids approached, Dink could see several officers boarding the yacht. "Look," Ruth Rose suddenly yelled. She pointed aft where Dr. Skor sat in his rubber dinghy. The man started the motor, and the dinghy roared toward the open sea. "He's getting away," Ruth Rose yelled. "Can you catch him?" Dink asked. Hugo grinned. "Do fish drink water?" he asked. "Hold on." Hugo thrust the throttle all the way forward. His boat tore around Sundown with its bow out of the water. The kids grabbed their seats and braced themselves as they bounced over the water. Ruth Rose was sitting next to Hugo. "You steer," he yelled in her ear. "Use both hands and get as close as you can to his dinghy." Oh my goodness. First of all, even with all the police there and a king and queen, the kids are still the only ones that can solve a crime. So they're coming after Dr. Skor, who's in the dinghy. Dink, Josh, and Sammy stared as Ruth Rose and Hugo switched places. Her knuckles were white as she clutched the steering wheel. Hugo picked up the anchor. It had 3 sharp prongs that were meant to grab and hold. A long rope was tied to the anchor. The rope's other end was attached to a metal ring on the bow. "Can you get any closer?" Hugo shouted to Ruth Rose. "Do monkeys eat bananas?" she shouted back. She turned the wheel and the boat responded. When his boat was about 15 feet from the dinghy, Hugo stood up, spread his legs for balance, then whipped the anchor over his head. The steel anchor landed in Dr. Skor's rubber dinghy with a thud. Hugo grabbed the wheel from Ruth Rose and whipped it around. Then he shoved the throttle forward and his boat lurched ahead. Woo! Looks like they're now attached to him. I don't know whether that's good or bad yet. Dink didn't understand what Hugo was up to. Was he planning to tow Dr. Skor's dinghy back to shore? But then he got it. The anchor rope was stretched to the breaking point, but it held. Suddenly they all heard a ripping noise. The anchor hooks had torn a hole in Dr. Skor's dinghy. When they looked, it was losing air fast. Dr. Skor turned and glared at Hugo and his passengers. The thief's face was nearly purple with rage. Just then, 2 police boats roared up to them. "Good job, kids," one of the officers said. "We'll take it from here." So they poked a hole in his boat. That worked out well. Rico and Mr. Baz were released from jail. Dr. Skor and his crew took their place. Police divers brought the gold ashore, and it was once more locked in the bank vault. Rico's crew repaired the vault floor and filled in the tunnel. The yellow crime scene tape came down, and work began in the aquarium again. "And I've you kids to thank for saving the day," the king said. Sammy had invited Hugo to join them for ice cream and leftover birthday cake. "If Dink hadn't noticed the green stripe was gone, Dr. Skor would have gotten away with it," Ruth Rose said. "How'd you figure it out?" the queen asked Dink. "At first I thought Yonder took the gold," Dink admitted. "But when we were exploring Dr. Skor's boat, we saw a paperweight on his desk." "A paperweight gave you a clue?" Josh said. "Not then," Dink said. "I just remembered that it was a miniature copy of Sundown, even with the green stripe. Later, when we were snorkeling with Hugo, he told us that the sunken boat had rocks in it to weigh it down. Then I remembered a strange thing about Dr. Skor's boat. I couldn't see the green stripe and wondered why. The next thing that popped into my head was something heavy must be weighing the yacht down. Something made the stripe sink below the water. And, of course, it was the gold, the king said. He raised his lemonade glass to Dink. Excellent reasoning, young man. How did Dr. Skouras get the gold in his boat? Josh asked. He told the cops his men took it out through the aquarium pipe, the king said. They just slid the gold bars right into the water, probably at night. Then his crew moved the gold underwater to that platform he'd already built onto Sundown's bottom. But how could the men swim while carrying that heavy gold, Ruth Rose said. The king looked at Hugo. Why don't you tell them, he said. Everything weighs less in water, Hugo explained. The crooks probably wore scuba equipment. They could easily carry the gold in baskets like deep-sea divers use. The king grinned at Dink, Josh, and Ruth Rose. I don't know how to thank you, he said. I do, Josh announced. He reached for the last piece of Sammy's birthday cake. Shockingly enough, he's eating. Well, that is the end of the Yellow Yacht. I hope you liked that one. I really enjoyed the Yellow Yacht. And guess what? We only have one more left. Next time, we'll be reading The Zombie Zone. I'll see you then. Bye.